20 years. 20 years of my life poured into someone else's dream. Sweat, blood, endless nights of problem solving, training staff, fixing crises, and keeping the chaos from exploding in everyone's faces. And then at 55, I was discarded. Tossed aside like I was nothing. Like I had already served my purpose, and now I was useless. But here's the twist. The story doesn't end in despair. Not for me, because buried in a forgotten childhood savings account was more than money. It was a revelation. A 40-year-old secret my parents carried with them to the grave. A secret that would flip everything I thought I knew about my life upside down. My name is Dennis Farrow. Until 3 months ago, I was the operations manager for the Bianchi Restaurant Group, a chain of Italian restaurants across Ohio. And I didn't just work there. I built it. Every detail, every process, every late night emergency. I trained every manager. I knew every supplier, every recipe, every health code violation we ever had to cover. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because what I discovered taught me a truth that every person who has ever given their heart to someone else's vision should hear. That even when life seems ready to crush you, sometimes your past and your parents are quietly plotting the ultimate comeback. My story begins with two ordinary people from Cleveland. My father, Eugene, worked at the Ford plant for 43 years. He never missed a day, never complained. My mother, Dorothy, assembled circuit boards at Lincoln Electric, precise, patient, and meticulous. They lived modestly in the same three-bedroom ranch they bought in 1978, drove used cars, and never wasted a dollar. But they weren't just saving, they were investing. Not in the stock market, not in flashy real estate. They were quietly setting up a safety net, a plan so clever that even I, someone who had devoted 2 decades to someone else's empire, never saw it coming. Let me take you back to the moment that changed everything. It was a morning like any other, or so I thought. I walked into a mahogany-paneled office, thinking I was there to continue the work that had defined my adult life. Instead, Salvatore Bianca, the man who had called me his American son, his partner in building a 7-restaurant empire, told me I was no longer needed. 55, he said. Too old. Out of date. His actual son, Rocco, 28 years old, sitting there with hands that had never scrubbed a fryer or mopped a kitchen floor at midnight, spoke about fresh perspectives and new directions. And I, looking at the framed photo from our first restaurant opening, both of us covered in flour, laughing through the chaos, realized something. That picture, that memory, was about to become evidence. Evidence that some investments, some relationships, some loyalty take decades to mature, and that my parents, the so-called ordinary factory workers, had been playing a game none of us understood. I met Salvatore when I was 35. Back then, he had a single small restaurant in downtown Cleveland known as Table, 40 seats if you squeezed them in. The kitchen was a tight, chaotic box where you had to turn sideways to pass someone. And Salvatore? He had fire in his belly, he had his grandmother's Tuscan recipes, and he had dreams bigger than that cramped little dining room could contain. I got the job through my cousin Frank, who delivered produce to restaurants. "This Italian guy needs help," he said over a Sunday dinner. "His books are a disaster, his inventory is a mess. But Dennis, the man can cook, and he's got fire in his belly." I was making decent money as an assistant manager at a hardware store, but nowhere. Stagnant. And with Joanne pregnant with our first son, Mitchell, I needed more than a paycheck. I needed a chance. The first time I walked into Nona's table, chaos hit me like a brick wall. Salvatore was shouting in Italian at a supplier while simultaneously stirring 3 pots on the stove. He looked at me, pointed a sauce-covered wooden spoon, and asked, "You the numbers guy Frank sent? Can you start now?" Within hours, I had sorted out tax papers, organized the office, negotiated with the delivery guy, and helped serve dinner when the waiter called in sick. Salvatore handed me a plate of lasagna at the end of the night. "You stay," he said. "I make you my operations manager." I didn't even know what an operations manager was, but Joanne understood. "He believes in you," she said, and that was enough. 20 years of my life were about to be consumed by that belief. When Salvatore opened a second location, I found the property, negotiated the lease, supervised renovations, and ran both restaurants without missing a beat. I trained every server, every manager. I memorized customer allergies, anniversaries, favorite dishes, quirks, and complaints. I cooked alongside chefs, mediated disputes at 2 a.m., and saved the company from financial disasters more times than anyone knew. My kids grew up in restaurant booths. My daughter learned to count by inventorying dinner rolls. My son did homework under flickering fluorescent lights while I juggled orders and staffing. By the time I turned 55, we had 7 restaurants and over 200 employees. I knew everyone's name, everyone's story. I thought loyalty and dedication would give me security. I was wrong. And yet, even as Salvatore and Rocco pushed me out the door, a revelation was waiting for me, hidden in a savings account that I'd forgotten since childhood. A collection of small deposits meticulously placed by my parents decades ago. While I was saving receipts and balancing books for a restaurant empire, my parents were quietly studying the world, understanding the value of compound interest, long-term planning, and patience. They lived simply, but their actions were extraordinary. Aluminum foil saved, Ziploc bags reused, coupons clipped, nothing wasted, and all of it was building toward a single goal: to protect their son from ruin, even when life seemed to turn against him. 3 weeks after my birthday, everything changed. A Tuesday morning, unusually cold for March, I walked into the flagship restaurant, heart heavy with betrayal and disbelief, ready to face the reality of being discarded. I thought my story was over. I thought loyalty had been a fool's errand. I didn't know that my parents had set in motion a plan that would turn my entire world upside down and inside out. As I stared at the marble counters, the stainless steel ovens, the polished wood, I realized that while I had been building someone else's dream, my parents had been building mine. And not just mine, they had been building a secret that would reveal itself only when I was ready. A secret that would show me, in ways I could never have imagined, that wisdom doesn't always wear a suit, that foresight doesn't always come from Wall Street or Harvard. Sometimes it comes from the people who scraped together a living on assembly lines, who understood that true value compounds quietly, invisibly, over decades. It's funny, isn't it? How the world tells you that loyalty means nothing, that age makes you obsolete, that hard work is meaningless. Yet the universe has a strange sense of justice. And my parents, ordinary people with extraordinary patience, had been quietly scripting my redemption story while I slaved away in someone else's kitchens, believing that I was powerless. And here's where it gets even more unbelievable. That forgotten savings account wasn't just money, it was a roadmap, a series of instructions, notes, and calculations that had been carefully documented over decades. Every deposit, every growth projection, every tiny investment had been done with the precision and insight of someone who understood not only finance, but human nature. My parents knew the world could be cruel. They knew that life could hand you betrayal when you least expected it. And they made sure that, if I survived long enough to notice, I would find my way back to security and beyond. I remember holding the papers, trembling, seeing numbers I couldn't believe, numbers that changed everything. And I thought of my father, standing at the Ford plant in the bitter Cleveland winters, hands calloused, face worn, yet mind sharp and calculating. I thought of my mother, precise and methodical, clipping coupons and saving scraps with a determination I'd only now begun to appreciate. They had played a longer game than I could have imagined, a game that outlasted corporate empires, outlasted the greed of family members, outlasted even my own fears and doubts. They understood what no one else seemed to: the value of patience, loyalty, and silent preparation. And as I stared at the numbers, I realized that my life, the years of sacrifice, the nights spent balancing chaos, had not been wasted. They had been preparation. Preparation for a moment that had nothing to do with Salvatore Bianchi or his empire or even my own expectations. This was bigger, far bigger. And in that moment, I understood the real power of my parents' wisdom. They had anticipated a betrayal I hadn't even imagined. They had laid a foundation that would survive the collapse of any business, the treachery of any partner, the cruelty of a world that dismisses hard work and loyalty as irrelevant. And it hit me. All those nights I thought I was powerless, all those moments I felt discarded, all those years of building someone else's dream, they were training. Training for the moment when I would finally discover the truth. And the truth wasn't just that I had been provided for, it was that I had been given the tools to rise higher than I ever imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Salvatore thought he had ended my story, my parents had been writing the real one for decades. And the ending? Well, that's the part I'm only just beginning to explore. Because the more I dig into their plan, the more I realize that what they created wasn't just a safety net. It was a launch pad, a blueprint for turning betrayal into opportunity, for transforming decades of service into a freedom I'd never dared to dream of. I left the restaurant that morning with a strange mix of grief, anger, and awe. Grief for the years spent giving everything to someone who never truly saw me. Anger at the injustice of being discarded. But awe at the brilliance of two ordinary people who had outwitted time itself, who had understood the world in ways that even I, with all my experience, had never grasped. As I walked through the streets of Cleveland, I couldn't stop thinking about the paradox of life. How sometimes the very people who seem insignificant, the ones clipping coupons and reusing Ziploc bags, hold the keys to survival, success, and a legacy that transcends greed, ambition, and corporate cruelty. And so I began to unravel their plan, piece by piece. Each discovery made me more certain that my parents' wisdom was the most valuable inheritance I could ever receive. Money, yes, but more than that, insight, strategy, foresight, and an understanding of human nature that could turn betrayal into triumph. The question isn't whether you can survive being thrown aside. It's whether you can recognize the hidden hand that guides you, even when life seems at its cruelest. My parents had played that hand, quietly and brilliantly, long before I even knew the game existed. And now, the board is set, the pieces are moving, and I'm beginning to see a future that no one, not even Salvatore Bianca, could have predicted. Every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of despair now has context. Every hour spent in chaos and conflict, every fight for loyalty and trust is suddenly illuminated by a hidden logic I never saw coming. And the most extraordinary part? This is only the beginning. Because when I finally understand what they left me and why, they will reveal a truth so powerful that it doesn't just change my life. It changes the way I see loyalty, hard work, family, and even the very idea of success itself. And as I prepare to unlock the next part of their plan, I can feel it. The sense that everything I've done, every ounce of sweat, every tear, every sleepless night, has led me here. To a moment where betrayal meets foresight, where loss meets opportunity, where the ordinary genius of my parents finally meets the extraordinary circumstances of my life. And just as the sun rises over the Cleveland skyline, I realize that the story isn't over. Not by a long shot. There's more to uncover, more to understand, more to claim. And the best part, I'm finally ready to see exactly how high the foundation my parents built can take me. The truth about loyalty, wisdom, and foresight is far more powerful than anyone imagined. And what I'm about to discover next will turn everything you think you know about life, betrayal, and opportunity completely upside down. I was reviewing the previous night's receipts, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the quiet clatter of silverware, when Marie, S's secretary, called me. Her voice was crisp, professional. "Mr. Bianchi wants to see you in his office. Rocco will be there too." Rocco, the youngest Bianchi son. Fresh out of Wharton, polished, impeccably groomed, a man whose entire education had been about spreadsheets and strategy sessions. He'd been hovering around the restaurants for 6 months, a shadow in a $1,000 suit, tablet in hand, observing everything we did with a detached curiosity. He had never rolled a napkin, never scrubbed a grill, never faced an angry customer at midnight, never fixed a freezer that had just decided to stop working during the lunch rush. And yet, he had opinions about everything. I walked into Salvatore's office in the new corporate building we had leased the previous year. The oak desk I had helped him find at an estate sale gleamed under the afternoon light, a monument to years of sweat and compromise. Rocco lounged in the leather chair beside him, fingers scrolling through his phone. The walls were adorned with photographs spanning decades of restaurant openings, celebrations, chaos captured in a perfect freeze frame. In every single one, there I was, standing beside Salvatore, laughing, covered in flour and sauce, exhausted but triumphant. Salvatore began, "Dennis, my friend." And immediately, my stomach dropped. I had heard that tone only once before in my life, the tone of someone apologizing for a wrong that hadn't yet been committed. Something was very, very wrong. "Please, sit down," he said, his hands folded over the polished surface of the desk. Rocco put his phone away, opened a leather-bound portfolio and began without preamble. Mr. Farrow, I've conducted a comprehensive analysis of our operations. We need to discuss restructuring. Restructuring, I repeated under my breath, feeling a familiar knot tighten in my chest. I looked at Salvatore, searching for the warmth, the camaraderie, the trust that had defined 2 decades of our work together. But his eyes were distant, staring at his hands, hollow. Last month, you told me profits were up 30%, I said. We're about to open number 8 in Westlake. What do you mean, restructuring? Rocco continued, unbothered. The business model needs updating. Digital ordering systems, social media campaigns, influencer partnerships, the restaurant industry has evolved beyond traditional management structures. I swallowed hard. My mouth went dry. I can learn new systems, I said, the words tasting like ash. You know I adapt. Remember when we switched to computerized inventory? I mastered it in a week. Salvatore finally looked at me, and that's when it hit me. The devastating clarity of betrayal. Dennis, you're too old for this business now, he said. These young people, they speak a different language. Instagram, TikTok, Rocco understands this world. Too old. 55 years old. 55. I work 70 hours a week. Who fixed the main refrigeration unit at midnight last Tuesday when it failed at location 2? Who handled the surprise health inspection at location 6 last month? That was me, every single time. And yet, in that polished office, I was suddenly invisible. Rocco slid a sheet of paper across the desk. 2 weeks severance for each year of service, 40 weeks pay. Very generous. 40 weeks pay. After 20 years, it felt like the universe had just punched me in the gut. And then I saw it. The non-compete clause. 2 years. 50 miles. Every restaurant, every place I had built, every corner of the industry I knew by heart. Suddenly, forbidden territory. You're blackballing me from the only industry I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's standard, Rocco replied, the words like cold steel sliding across my chest. Sign here. And here. I looked at Salvatore. The man who had called me family, who had stood at my father's funeral beside me, who had raised a toast at my mother's memorial, now shrugged. I have sons, real sons. Business is business, Dennis. I signed. 40 weeks pay. That was all. My heart ached, my mind spun. I walked out carrying a cardboard box, 20 years of life condensed into file folders and old calendars. The security guard, Tommy, the one I had hired 3 years prior, couldn't meet my eyes, and through the window I saw Rocco, already sitting at my desk, feet up, laughing on the phone as though I'd never existed. Driving home was a blur. I didn't know how to tell Joanne. Folding laundry in the kitchen, she looked up and froze. Her eyes fell on the cardboard box, the panic registering before the words left my mouth. He fired you? She whispered, sinking onto the couch. Yes, I said. Every syllable felt like a betrayal, every pause heavier than the last. I told her about the meeting, the graphs, the non-compete, about how the world had suddenly closed its doors. Her silence was worse than words. Then she looked at the wall, at the photograph from S's 65th birthday. My arm around him, smiles, celebration, loyalty rewarded with nothing but dismissal. We'll figure it out, she finally said, but the hollowness in her voice mirrored my own. You'll find something else. For 2 weeks I tried. Resumes sent, interviews scheduled, hope dwindling. Restaurants were off limits. Retail, logistics, manufacturing, rejection after rejection. The same subtext in every email, every call. We need someone younger. One hiring manager, more honest than the rest, said it outright. Dennis, you're qualified, but my boss won't hire anyone over 50. He thinks they can't adapt to corporate culture. Our savings were burning faster than I could calculate. Mitchell, my son, had an internship in Chicago requiring $3,000 we didn't have. Renee needed new soccer cleats, tournament fees, orthodontist bills. The car groaned with expensive noises. The water heater died. The walls seemed to close in. Then one morning, after another sleepless night of calculating, recalculating, and praying, I wandered into the basement, searching for any forgotten asset, anything that could help. That's when I found it. An old filing cabinet, precise, organized, painstakingly maintained by my mother. Tax returns from the 1970s, my report cards, birthday cards, every little scrap of paper, carefully labeled, and in the very back, a small yellow envelope. Dennis, First Federal Bank, 1985. Inside was a passbook for a savings account I had completely forgotten. Suddenly, I remembered. I was 15 years old, my first real paycheck, $20 for a week at Henderson's Hardware. Grandpa Theodore, my mother's father, drove me to the bank in his old Buick, the smell of pipe tobacco and peppermint lingering. "Every man needs his own money," he said, guiding my hands over the deposit slip. "This account is yours. Don't touch it until you really need it. Not for a car, not for a girl, not for anything except a real emergency." I had deposited $20 and promptly forgotten it. Life moved on. College, marriage, kids, the restaurant empire, all of it. And now, 40 years later, that small forgotten account sat before me. I flipped through the passbook expecting a few $100s, maybe 1,000 if I was lucky. But as I read, my heart began to race. The numbers weren't just bigger, they were staggering. Every deposit, every interest calculation, every tiny investment compounded over decades. My parents had quietly, patiently, methodically built a lifeline for me, one I had never known existed until this precise, desperate moment. They'd understood something that the world, Salvatore, Rocco, and even I had not. That true security doesn't come from loyalty to someone else's dream. It doesn't come from hours worked or praise earned or photo op celebrations. It comes from foresight, from patience, from playing a long game that most people don't even know exists. And suddenly, I saw it. Every sacrifice I had made, every hour of stress, every moment of frustration, it had led me here to the discovery of a secret so powerful, so perfectly timed, that it could change everything. Not just our finances, but our entire lives. I held the passbook in my hands, shaking, a wave of disbelief, gratitude, and awe crashing over me. My parents, ordinary people living modest lives, had orchestrated a rescue that no one, not even the most ruthless businessman, could have anticipated. Their foresight, their wisdom, their quiet persistence had created a safety net that could support not just survival, but transformation. And as I stared at those numbers, I realized something even more profound. This wasn't just money, it was a lesson, a message, a revelation that the greatest power often lies in the quietest acts. That sometimes life's insurance policies aren't purchased with credit cards or high powered brokers, they're sewn together in decades of patience, of small, deliberate, unseen choices. I felt a surge of emotion I hadn't experienced in years: anger at Salvatore, pain at the betrayal, relief at the lifeline my parents had provided, anticipation. Because this discovery wasn't an ending. It was the opening move of a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. And as I stared at that yellowed envelope, at the meticulously kept passbook, I knew that everything was about to change. That the betrayal I had suffered, the doors slammed in my face, the world insisting I was obsolete, all of it was about to collide with a force far greater than I had ever imagined. I could feel it in my bones. The next move was mine, and the game my parents had begun decades ago, quietly, patiently, was finally ready for me to play. The question now isn't whether I can survive. The question is, what will I do with the knowledge, the opportunity, and the legacy they left behind? Because what I discovered in that forgotten savings account isn't just a lifeline, it's a roadmap. And what comes next will reveal a truth so astonishing that it will redefine everything I thought I knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the quiet genius of ordinary people who saw the future while the rest of us were blind. And as I closed the passbook and felt the weight of those 40 years settle into my hands, I realized this is only the beginning. Even a few $100s could have meant groceries for a couple of weeks, a temporary lifeline in the chaos of my life. After everything with Salvatore and Rocco, I felt foolish walking into a bank carrying a 40-year-old passbook like some kind of relic from a forgotten era. First Federal Bank had long since been swallowed by Ohio Trust in the 90s, then acquired by Midwest National in 2010. The building on Pearl Road was unrecognizable, glass and chrome, a stark contrast to the brick and marble of my memory. And here I was, holding a yellowed piece of paper like it contained the secrets of the universe. I approached the teller, a young woman named Brittany, hair perfectly styled, nails manicured to perfection. She took the passbook from my trembling hands, her expression a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Oh, wow, this is seriously vintage," she said. "I've never seen one of these outside of training photos." "I know it's old," I mumbled, embarrassed. "The account probably doesn't even exist anymore." No, no, she reassured me quickly. These old accounts are totally still valid. They just require special handling. Let me get my manager. She loves this stuff. Minutes later, Patricia Holstead, the branch manager, appeared. She was probably in her 40s, professional but kind. The kind of person who actually made you feel like she saw you, really saw you, when she spoke. She took the passbook from Brittany, carefully running her finger along the faded account number, examining every detail. Mr. Farrow, she said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and awe. This is fascinating. These old First Federal accounts are rare. Let me look this up in our legacy system. She led me to her office, away from the main banking floor, a quiet place where the hum of computers and soft chatter didn't reach. The old account number 0048711985 appeared on her screen. She typed carefully, navigating a system that looked like it belonged in the early 1980s, green text against black, blinking cursor, every keystroke deliberate. Then she paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Is there a problem? I asked, my heart beginning to race. Is the account closed? No, Mr. Farrow. The account is very much active, she said, her tone serious now. But there's something unusual here, something I've never seen before. My stomach sank. Unusual. That word made my pulse quicken. She leaned back in her chair, cleaned her glasses as if that could somehow clarify the impossible numbers on her screen. Mr. Farrow, this account has an automatic investment program attached to it. Extremely unusual for a 1985 savings account, especially one opened for a minor. I leaned forward, my voice barely audible. I just deposited $20 when I was 15. That's it. That's all I ever put in. No, sir, Patricia said, her eyes wide. There were additional deposits. She tilted her monitor toward me, green text scrolling across the black screen. $5 every month from 1985 to 2010. The deposits came from Eugene Farrow. Then from 2010 to 2015, $10 monthly from Dorothy Farrow. My throat tightened. My parents, they had never mentioned this, not once. Patricia's voice softened, tinged with astonishment. But that's not the most unusual part. These deposits weren't just sitting in savings. They were automatically routed to a brokerage account that purchased the same stock every single month for 40 years. I blinked. Stock? Yes, Mr. Farrow. Do you know what Berkshire Hathaway is? The room seemed to tilt. Warren Buffett's company, the golden standard of investments. And my parents, humble factory workers clipping coupons and shopping at discount stores, had been buying into it every single month without fail since 1985. Patricia's fingers danced over the keyboard. $2,150 per share in 1985. Today, one share of Berkshire Hathaway Class A trades at $543,000. I gripped the arms of the chair, disbelief anchoring my limbs. That can't be right. It is absolutely right, Patricia said, printing sheets as the pages began cascading across her desk. Your account purchased fractional shares every month for 40 years. The compound growth, the accumulation, the patience, it's staggering. Mr. Farrow, your current account balance is $3,742,860.34. I stared at the number. My parents, working assembly lines, clipping coupons, scrimping every penny. They had quietly built a fortune from nothing. My mind raced. How had they done this without me ever knowing? What foresight, what discipline, what faith in the future did it take to quietly invest every month for 40 years? Patricia leaned back, her voice gentle. The Social Security numbers match. These deposits definitely came from your parents. And then she added something that made my pulse spike again. But there's more. A sealed letter in our vault is attached to this account. My hands trembled as the weight of 40 years of secrets and unseen wisdom pressed down on me. A letter? What could it contain? Instructions, explanations, guidance? A roadmap my parents had left for me, hidden for decades, only to be revealed when I needed it most. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the reality of the situation slowly settling in. This wasn't just money. This was strategy, vision, patience. A lesson disguised as a savings account. A secret prepared with meticulous care by two ordinary people who understood the power of time and consistency. And then I realized every struggle with bills, every sleepless night worrying about college tuition and medical bills, every moment of fear after Salvatore and Rocco discarded me. They had all led me here. Not to despair, not to ruin, but to a hidden lifeline my parents had built long before I even knew it was necessary. I thought about my father, hands calloused from decades at the Ford plant, mind sharp and deliberate even in the simplest routines. I thought about my mother, meticulous and patient, arranging circuit boards, organizing coupons, clipping and saving with a precision I had always overlooked. And together they had quietly orchestrated a rescue mission decades in the making. I felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and awe. The very people I had underestimated, the ones who never held prestigious titles or degrees, had seen the future more clearly than anyone else. They had understood the value of patience, of compound growth, of small, consistent actions accumulating into something monumental. And now, as I sat in Patricia Holstead's office, staring at the printouts, the green text on black, the numbers that seemed almost too miraculous to be real, I realized this was not just a story about money. It was about foresight, about strategy, about understanding the long game of life in a way I had never even imagined. But the sealed letter that was the piece that could change everything, not just financially, but personally, strategically, fundamentally. What guidance had my parents left me? What wisdom had they tucked away, waiting for this precise moment of desperation, of need? As Patricia carefully explained the process for accessing the letter, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a revelation, a message. 40 years of planning and patience, delivered in the quietest, most unassuming way, waiting for me to uncover it. Every late night I had spent worrying, every sleepless night balancing bills, every moment I had doubted my own abilities, it all converged here in this tiny vault with a yellowed passbook, a mountain of meticulously calculated numbers, and a sealed letter that promised answers I could barely imagine. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. My parents' ordinary lives, their factory jobs, their simple routines had concealed a legacy more powerful than any I had dreamed of. And now, finally, I was on the threshold of understanding it. Patricia slid the forms across her desk, ready to begin the process. I could feel the gravity of the moment, the culmination of decades of unseen work, the culmination of a secret carefully preserved and intentionally hidden until the precise moment it was most needed. As I took a deep breath and prepared to open that vault, I felt a strange mix of fear, excitement, and awe, because what my parents had built wasn't just money. It was a lesson in patience, in foresight, in the kind of vision that stretches across decades, outlasting empires, betrayals, and human frailty. And as the door to the vault opened and the sealed letter came into view, I realized that what I was about to discover would not just change my life. It would redefine everything I thought I knew about loyalty, wisdom, and the power of a quiet, deliberate life lived with purpose. The world I had known, the rules I had followed, the sacrifices I had made, they were about to collide with a force I had never anticipated. And as I reached for the envelope, my hands trembling, I knew one thing for certain. My life, my family, and everything I had believed about possibility were about to be transformed in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. And that's when the real journey began. The moment felt surreal, like the universe itself had slowed down just for me. Patricia leaned across the desk, her voice soft but deliberate. The instructions say it can only be opened when you access the account. Would you like me to get it? I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know if it was anticipation, fear, or something deeper. Some primal understanding that life was about to reveal a secret my parents had carried in silence for decades. A few minutes later, Patricia returned with a yellowed envelope. My name, written in my mother's precise, careful cursive, graced the front. The paper smelled faintly of time, of decades stored away in safety. I slid my fingers over the delicate edges, feeling the weight of history and love in that simple rectangle. Inside was a letter, dated June 15th, 1985, and at the bottom, a second note, scribbled 25 years later in my father's shaky handwriting. The first note, my mother's hand unmistakable, began gently. Dear Dennis, if you're reading this, you've hit a hard time. We know because we set this up so you could only access it when you truly needed it. Not for a car or a vacation, but when life knocks you down. Her words hit me like a wave, a combination of care and calculated foresight. They had built a lifeboat knowing I might one day be floundering, and now it was here, waiting silently, The letter continued. Your father's cousin Raymond works at a bank in Omaha. He told us about this man, Warren Buffett, who thinks differently about money. Raymond said, this Buffett fellow buys companies and holds them forever. He believes in patience over flash. Your father and I don't understand all of it, but we understand this. Good things grow slowly. Trees, children, love, and apparently money invested wisely. Every $5 we put away came from somewhere. One less lunch out, walking instead of driving when gas was high, fixing things instead of replacing them. We did it because we know the world can be cruel. We know that sometimes good, hardworking people get thrown away. If that happens to you, remember that your value isn't determined by what anyone else thinks. You are our greatest investment. Love, Mom. Every memory of my parents' modest life, the used cars, the coupon clipping, the thriftiness, flashed in my mind. Every small sacrifice they had made, every penny they had quietly diverted from their ordinary lives, had been for me. Every act of patience, every small decision had been a building block in this invisible fortress of love and foresight. Then there was my father's note, added 25 years later, a testament to a lifelong lesson in persistence. Still adding money every month, son. Buffett was right about patience. Your mother thinks we should tell you, but I say no. You don't need it yet. You're doing great with S, but if you ever do need it, remember that we always knew you were worth more than anyone could pay you. Dad, 2010. I didn't realize I was crying until the tears hit the paper. Patricia handed me a tissue quietly. Mr. Farrow, she said softly, there's also a note in the system from the investment side. Your parents specifically chose Berkshire Hathaway. Never diversified, never sold a single share. They bought through every recession, every boom, every bust. 40 years of $5 and $10 purchases. They lived so simply, and yet, here you are. I whispered, almost to myself. They could have used this money. They lived so simply, they could have used it. Patricia's eyes were kind. Maybe they thought you were a better investment than anything they could have bought. I sat in my car outside the bank for an hour, holding that letter, reading it again and again, letting every word sink in. My parents, who had never taken a plane for vacation, who celebrated their anniversary at the same local steakhouse every year, who wore clothes until they literally fell apart, had quietly built me a fortune, one small monthly investment at a time. And the irony was not lost on me. Salvatore Bianchi, who drove a Mercedes, wore a Rolex, and constantly spoke of building an empire, had thrown me away because he thought my value had expired. Meanwhile, my parents, humble, patient, disciplined, had bet everything on a principle the world rarely honors. That value compounds over time. When I finally returned home and told Joanne, she collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing, not out of grief, but out of relief and sheer amazement. Mitchell drove home from college that night. Renee kept asking over and over, is this real? Is this actually real? And we sat around our dining room table until 3 in the morning, reading my parents' letter out loud, laughing and crying in equal measure. But the money itself, the millions, was only part of the revelation. The real gift, the lesson embedded in decades of patience and foresight, was understanding what my parents had known all along. They'd invested in Warren Buffett, yes, but more importantly, they had understood his philosophy. Value investing isn't about quick returns or flashy gains. It's about recognizing true worth and having the patience to let it grow. 2 weeks later, I opened my own restaurant. Nothing flashy, no imported marble, no Instagram influencers or pretense. Just a small neighborhood spot in Lakewood with good bones and a name that honored my parents, Eugene and Dorothy's. I hung their picture by the entrance, a silent tribute to the people who had changed my life long before I even realized it. I hired Martha first. S had fired her 6 months prior, telling her at 62 she was too old to run a kitchen. She cried when I offered her the job. Hector came next, 58, replaced by someone younger at Salvatore's. Louise, 67, who had been let go elsewhere for being too slow with technology, memorized every customer's name and preference within a week. We opened quietly, no hashtags, no social media blitz, just good food, fair prices, and people who cared about what they were doing. Martha's pasta was poetry. Hector kept the kitchen running like a Swiss watch. Louise made every diner feel like they were at their grandmother's table. Words spread the old-fashioned way. One person telling another, families returning, bringing friends. Within 3 months, we had a 45-minute wait on Friday nights. 6 months later, Rocco Bianchi showed up. Standing in the doorway of my packed restaurant, he looked smaller than I remembered. The digital revolution he had been so sure of had failed spectacularly. 3 of the 7 Bianchi restaurants had closed. The remaining ones struggled. "My father wants to know if you'd consider coming back," he said, having to raise his voice over the bustling dinner crowd. "He's willing to discuss terms." I looked around Eugene and Dorothy's, Martha teaching a young cook to season sauce, Hector fixing a wobbly chair while chatting with a customer in Spanish, Louise bringing a surprise birthday cake to a regular. "Tell Salvatore thanks," I said, "but I'm too old for his business. I'm exactly the right age for mine." Rocco left without ordering. 2 more Bianchi restaurants closed that year. Salvatore retired to Florida. His empire shrank to just the original Nona's Table, now run by his nephew. Meanwhile, Eugene and Dorothy's thrives, not an empire, but a single restaurant that does everything right. Because my parents taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Wealth isn't measured by what you can spend, it's measured by what you can build, what you can pass on, what you can become when someone believes in your worth. Sometimes, the greatest fortune isn't discovering money you didn't know existed. It's realizing that someone loved you enough to plant trees whose shade they would never enjoy, believing that one day you'd stand beneath them and understand your value. And as I sit in my restaurant, watching families laugh and share meals, teaching young cooks the lessons my parents taught me without even knowing it, I know my parents' wisdom wasn't just about money. It was about patience, loyalty, foresight, and the quiet understanding that true value doesn't expire. It grows, unseen, until the world finally notices. Because the best investments, the ones that really matter, aren't found in the stock market. They're found in believing, without question, that someone's worth more than the world says they are. And as Eugene and Dorothy's hums with life around me, I realize this story isn't just mine. It could be yours. Waiting, perhaps, for your own moment of discovery. The moment when you finally understand that your value was never measured by others, but by the patient, quiet care of those who truly believed in you all along.